Good afternoon, everyone. It is an honor for us to welcome you to the Scientific Forum on Vaccination, entitled What Do COVID-19 Vaccines Really Contain? This event is fully organized by National Deputy Marilú Quiroz and her team. And we would especially like to thank the President of the Honorable Chamber of Deputies of the Nation, Mr. Martín Menem. We would also like to extend our thanks to the media, the scientific community, and to medical professionals and specialists from other fields who are joining us not only by participating in person as panelists or audience members, but also to all those professionals and the general public who will be following this broadcast, scheduled to run until 8 p.m. when it concludes. To all of you, once again, thank you very much. We begin this event by welcoming the organizer of the event with a warm round of applause. National Deputy Marilú Quiroz is now entering.
A very good morning to you all. And those who know me know that I never read anything, but today I am going to read. First, my thanks. I want to deeply thank the President of the Chamber of Deputies, as Viviana already mentioned, Mr. Martín Menem, because he gave us the authorization to do this, which is so important. Thank you. Yeah, honestly, he deserves a round of applause. It wasn't easy. Those who provided me with this room, as I just mentioned, to the speakers, to the audience present, and to my personal team. With everyone's contribution, we were able to make this possible. I also want to give special thanks to those who, with great composure, helped bring different positions together and to calm some heated tempers. Their role was decisive, fundamental. This gathering was difficult to achieve. This event was almost cancelled several times. But as you can see, we are here. There have always been groups that tried to uphold a single official narrative, with no interest in listening to qualified voices, something that is essential for science. We know that in 6 hours, when this is over, we will not have achieved a concrete result, but we will have accomplished something essential. The greater visibility and opening up of the topic to society and to Congress. My goal as a national legislator is to have provided a space, an open and inclusive forum for the different positions and perspectives to be expressed freely here in this forum. You know that I am finishing my term as a national deputy. However, today we are taking the first step toward advancing a shared aspiration, the modification of the mandatory and compulsory nature of vaccination. And the possibility to delve deeper into what was inoculated into us during the pandemic. The confidentiality clauses from the laboratories should never have been accepted, and this is an issue that deserves complete transparency. Today, 20 speakers will be presenting. I would have liked for many more to be able to participate. Many more people, but the allotted time did not allow for it. From the outset, my sincerest apologies to those who could not speak. Even so, all the invited voices were selected with discernment, diversity, and solid reasoning. Don't think that we didn't invite opposing voices. We did. We simply invited them. They preferred to be absent rather than face the path of truth and the open exchange we are willing to have today. Now I want to ask something of everyone who is going to speak. Let's not waste this opportunity or everything that lies ahead of us. When I mentioned on social media that I was sensing a Boca River rivalry, I wasn't exaggerating. Even today, those divisions still exist. I ask you for a gesture of greatness. Let's set aside arguments and egos. This issue is far too important to allow internal divisions. And you know better than anyone that there were people who worked with tremendous humanity to bring us together and to make sure we are all here today without seeking recognition. I am, of course, very grateful to those good human beings, to use the words of José de San Martín, for putting our personal interests aside for the good of the country. It's obvious that I don't have the technical knowledge that the speakers have. There's a reason they're here today. I may be ignorant about many subjects, but I am not ignorant when it comes to human values. And this one here, what am I talking to you about? And this comes from the fact that I've been called an idiot all over social media and everywhere else, ignorant. How can I dare to talk about something I don't know about? But I listen, and the opportunity should be given to those who know, to those who have studied, to those who have the statistics. Yes, I pay attention. Finally, a message for the constant destroyers, for those who enjoy division. In 6 hours, you will have a photo that will show that unity built more than your intention to destroy. That this issue should not turn into a shouting match, and that you should work with humility and respect even when there are opposing opinions, because what we want to achieve is the best quality of life for people. I am deeply grateful to everyone. We formally begin this first scientific symposium at the National Congress of Argentina. To all of you who have worked so hard and for so many years. And this is a debt that all legislators and leaders have, to listen to other voices.
Let's reiterate then. Dr. Marcela Sangorrín will now take the floor. Excuse me, please. Well, as I was telling you, due to the great challenge posed by these imposed inoculations, and moreover by coercion, many doctors and nurses, seeing the harm their patients suffered from receiving these vaccines, provided us with vials so we could conduct analyses. We analyzed the 6 brands that were sold in Argentina that were injected into people, and we also analyzed the dengue and flu vaccines the ones shown there, as well as saline solutions and dental anesthetics, but I won't be able to talk about those today. You can find that information on the website laresistencia.lib. Of the three analyses I will discuss, the first is the fluorescence microscope. Why did we start this analysis? Because already in Germany and Spain, independent scientists had detected particles that had the spectrum of graphene oxide. So since our laboratories at the CONICET Institute had a graphene oxide standard, we used that standard to see the fluorescence of graphene oxide under the microscope at the different wavelengths that allow a particle to be excited. When it is fluorescent, it emits light at a specific wavelength. And that characterizes its profile. It gives something like the identity of a molecule. Not all particles or all molecules fluoresce. So it is known that graphene oxide is highly fluorescent and has a wide range between 300 and 1,200 nanometers. So using the graphene oxide standard from the company Sigma Aldrich, we observed under bright field how those particles looked and with different filters, the light they emitted. That is how particles formed by molecules are presented. Having the standard, we compared by using the same technique. We analyzed samples from Pfizer, AstraZeneca, Sinopharm, which you can see some examples of here, and found that the particles also exhibited the same fluorescence as graphene oxide. We also observed batches that had particles with different fluorescence under the same filter. So not all of them are functionalized with the same elements or with the same chemical groups. That also changes their fluorescence spectrum. All of this is described for graphene oxide in the literature. And you can find all the published work on the websites I've listed below. All of these analyses, which we carried out ourselves, together with Licenciada Lorena Diblasi, was done on the advice of the lawyers present here in the room in front of a notary public. And that is the notarial record. So we certified the way the samples were taken and analyzed. And they were present the entire time. After this analysis, everyone was asking us, well, but how many particles are there? And what size are they? Well, that requires another piece of equipment. We did this in a private laboratory here in Buenos Aires, a company dedicated to quality analysis using the Morphology 3 microscope. We were able to quantify and characterize the particles both in size and shape, starting from 0.5 microns. The equipment gives a complete overview of all the particles it finds in 1 milliliter, and it is certified by the technicians who performed the analysis. There we found, for example, in this batch of Pfizer, 70,000 particles per milliliter, when in fact it is not approved solely by the Pharmacopoeia. No more than 6,000 particles of 10 microns and no more than 600 of 25 microns. And here we found almost 60,000 of 10 microns and 7,000 of 25 microns. There are the graphs where you can see those that are 10 microns and 25 microns. This batch of Sputnik also had the permitted number of particles exceeded by more than 100 for more than 10 microns and more than 25 microns. The 10 micron ones are the widest bar, but also, well, both quantities exceed the permitted amount by more than 100. Another analysis we did to find out what other elements these particles were made of besides graphene oxide was commissioned as a service from another CONICET institute located in the city of Roca, IPG. This microscope allows you to focus on a particle and using X-ray dispersion analyzes what chemical elements are present. So, for example, the previous photo was of Well, I don't remember if that one was from AstraZeneca. This one was also from AstraZeneca, where we see that sort of little handkerchief shape, which you can measure. And the X-ray beam tells us the composition with those graphs, with those peaks. In this case, we see that it had 47% carbon, 36% oxygen, sodium, and we also detected iron and copper. So from there, we can see which chemical elements are present. This was also published, and in the different brands, AstraZeneca, Pfizer, Sinopharm, and CanSino, we found more than 10 undeclared chemical elements. Among them were aluminum, copper, iron, manganese, platinum, 10 chemical elements, including aluminum as well. You can view and explore all of these complete studies on our website, as I mentioned earlier, or on the research page. There you have the complete table of the 10 chemical elements and how many particles from each brand contain these elements. Silicon, which I forgot to mention, and cerium, which I also forgot to mention. Among them, those marked with a star are heavy metals. But that's just a classification. Not only heavy metals are harmful, let's say, and none of those elements should be present in an injectable. They are toxic and make no sense for human health. They are completely toxic. And even more so, when they form particles, they're not even in a free state. Since 2022, we have been submitting all these studies as remote procedures to the ADEMAT, the Ministry of Health, and CONICET. All these procedures were so that the institutions would take charge of quality control. They never responded to us, and when they did, their answers were evasive or meaningless paragraphs copied from the internet saying that vaccines are safe and effective, and they never actually conducted the official analyses. So this is very serious because these particles shouldn't be there, and these toxic elements are what's causing vaccine injuries. There was one slide missing. Up until 2023, 24 undeclared chemical elements were detected by other researchers around the world, and based on that data, Lorena will later show you the latest analysis, which is the ICP mass, where we determine the total chemical element composition in these 6 vaccine brands. All this work was published in international journals and has served as support for other researchers to continue searching for the causes of these diseases. And why are these elements there? What is the purpose of having these elements present, since they are not a source of contamination, but rather are intentionally added? So all the complete studies, the notary records, and the other studies that we can't discuss due to time, such as those on anesthetics and serums, can be found on our website. Well, thank you very much.
Now, moving forward, we would like to take this opportunity to warmly welcome Ms. Lorena Diblasi to the stage. She holds a degree in biotechnology from the National University of Tucumán. She has conducted research in pharmaceutical nanotechnology, recombinant proteins for human use, and liquid chromatography coupled with mass spectrometry. She has worked in the pharmaceutical industry, in quality control and quality assurance areas, and worked as an auditor for pharmaceutical laboratories. There is just one last note to make in this regard, which is to clarify that Ms. Lorena Diblasi will have 5 additional minutes for her presentation, which are being donated to her by Dr. Lucia Langer, who will present for 5 minutes. Please go ahead, Ms. Lorena Diblasi. Your time starts now.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I want to thank Deputy Marilú Quiroz and her team for giving us this opportunity to finally present the reality of what we have been experiencing over the past 5 years. And I also want to sincerely thank the President of the Chamber of Deputies, Mr. Martín Menem. I would also like to thank each and every one of those present here today, especially the affected individuals and their families who are with us today, who made the effort to come even though many are currently facing very serious and challenging health issues and personal hardships. Your presence here is truly appreciated. Well, today I am going to present 2 points. On one hand, the ICP MASA study that we conducted together with Dr. Marcela Sangorrín, Dr. Martin Monteverde, an Argentine physician, and Dr. David Nonis, a cellular and molecular biologist. And on the other hand, I am going to present for the first time in Argentina the statistics on people affected, harmed by the COVID-19 vaccines. Well, so here in this slide we can see these are all the samples that we have analyzed using ICP MASA. What is this methodology used for? To detect chemical elements and quantify them. I'll go back to this slide that Dr. Sangorrín showed. Here what we can observe among all the vaccines, because we analyzed all the brands that entered Argentina, we can observe nano and microparticles through electron microscopy. Dr. Gustavo Fano is here, who was part of the research group that conducted the first study in Argentina using electron microscopy. Thank you, at the University of La Plata, and they also found these same results. And not just here, in Romania, in Spain, in England. In other words, different researchers around the world have been finding the same thing. Nano and microparticles composed mainly of carbon and oxygen, and then by other chemical elements, which shouldn't be there because they're not part of the declared component formulas. And it's also very strange that inside there is platinum, rhodium, ruthenium, cadmium, chromium, palladium, because those chemical elements are present in here. And at the same time, we've been observing that these particles arrange themselves, self-assemble, and form other structures. We've also been observing this, and this is something that should also be further investigated using other methodologies. All right, so these are all the elements we've detected through ICP MAS. And just look at the number of chemical elements. And of course, with this methodology, we can't detect carbon and oxygen, which we've already detected using SEM-ADX. And this is important because, as I always say, all the data, all the results need to be brought together. Here, I can't see carbon and oxygen. I can see all these elements, and in total, across all the brands, we found 55 chemical elements, and there are even more because with CNDX, fluorine and bromine were detected, which can't be detected with this methodology. Why is that? Because they have a very small atomic mass, just like carbon and oxygen. But they're there, they are present. And for us, well, here you have a distribution of the different brands. And let's look at this. The greater the number of analyses we have, the greater the number of chemical elements that appear. And here we reached a very important conclusion after also conducting the study with the morphology G3 equipment, where we were able to quantify thousands and thousands of particles per milliliter. And here we see that there are particles of different sizes with different compositions. So when we took an aliquot of the sample, digested it with nitric acid, and ran the sample through the ICP mass spectrometer, we found a certain composition. And the duplicate from the same vial, without opening it, taking it with a Hamilton syringe to avoid contaminating the sample. Here, all necessary precautions were taken, the work was done seriously, and the technique had to be fine-tuned because this is like a black box. Even though we have theoretical information provided by the manufacturers, many of those things have not been verified and are even incompatible with what we are finding. So in the duplicate, I find a different composition. And this makes sense because the sample is heterogeneous. Because if I take other particles of a different size and we are seeing that they have different chemical elements, of course the result is going to vary. So there were results where the values were so scattered that we couldn't calculate an average. All right, so the most important thing to highlight here is that none of the vaccines from any of the manufacturers meet the uniformity of content requirement, which absolutely all medications in all pharmaceutical forms should comply with. Well, here, uniformity of content is not being met. And this is serious because these vials were also multi-dose. Different doses were taken from the same vial. And here I want to highlight on this slide, because we have been presenting all of this to INAMI and MAT, to the Ministry of Health. We have filed complaints. We have been submitting all of this to the health authorities, requesting that the analyzed batches be withdrawn from the market as they should be, and they are doing nothing. We even analyzed the Kudenga vaccine against dengue, the flu vaccine, saline solutions, dental anesthetics, and found graphene oxide in absolutely all the vials taken at random. We bought from a pharmacy, we went with a notary, all right? So we are finding the same thing, fluorescent material. When none of the components are fluorescent, I shouldn't be seeing fluorescence. This is something obvious and logical. And yet, what does INAM and MAT answer us? This is one of the answers they always give. They reply to us with that manual, which I cited there for everyone to see, which is a WHO PAHO manual. And what do they tell us? Even though they are not, they do not belong to our nation, they do not belong to our homeland, they are a supranational organization funded by the same pharmaceutical companies. I want to highlight two phrases. In the first one, they say that it is very difficult to carry out quality control on vaccines in the finished product, which is the one that goes to market. And why is it difficult? What is the obstacle? Well, this is what that manual states. And in the second phrase, they say that since we, the underdeveloped countries of the third world, who depend on the PAHO, and PAHO in turn depends on the WHO, we do not have the analytical capacity, the ability to analyze, so we have to trust them as they are the ones who carried out the controls. On the products, theoretically, because we have no proof that these pharmaceutical companies produce, and so, well, it seems it's a matter of faith. In other words, we have to have faith that the WHO audits, inspects, controls, and that just because they do it, we have to trust in that. This is INAMI's response to MAT. It's really serious. All right. In this second part, what I'm going to show is the work we've been doing as a team, as an organized community, coming together and working over all these years. And I want to highlight First of all the affected citizens, there are thousands in Argentina, and this needs to be said, there are thousands, it's just that there are very few who are brave enough, who upon realizing it said, I'm going to file a complaint. Brave people who took the time and effort, because this really is work as well. I want to highlight the team of lawyers we've been working with, Dr. Ianolfi, Dr. Roca, Dr. Sufer, and I don't want to forget anyone, but we've been working together, and also Dr. Astrid Basso, and the medical team, to whom we are grateful, because they took the time to interview each patient and report the ISABIs to the Argentine pharmacovigilance system, so the Ministry of Health cannot claim that there are no people who have been harmed. Here, Pablo Shetlin is supposedly giving a talk upstairs, saying that what we're presenting here is a fantasy, it's a lie, that we're anti-vaccine. No, sir, these ISABIs are documented. And this should be showing, after this date, after today, the Ministry of Health should show us their comprehensive and detailed statistical analysis study. I'm going to show it, which is the work we've been doing, recording it in a database. But it's not our job. It's not my obligation. I don't have to do this. We are investing our time, our resources with the few resources we have to do this work. Sincere thanks to the dedicated and hardworking medical team, and thanks to the committed citizen collaborators, like Gloria Brown, a nurse, and so many others who have been entering all the patients into that database, recording the batch number, the brand of the vaccine they were given, or the different doses that were administered to people. And finally, I want to thank Cecilia and Daniel, who are the ones who collected all the data from that database where we register names and surnames, ID numbers, phone numbers, interviewing people, providing emotional support. Because this is very hard. There are people who were completely healthy and today have suffered an amputation, a cancer, out of nowhere. Well, not out of nowhere after the vaccine, but they had no pre-existing conditions. And many people who already had pre-existing conditions saw them worsen or developed other pathologies. So, we've been keeping that record, right? And we took the time to carefully and thoroughly classify all the illnesses we've been finding in all the patients. We worked on 193 cases, and you might say, well, that's not much. Well, this was a job that took a lot of effort done to be able to see statistically which batches are the most toxic, for example. And that's quite a lot. Why? Because even among the lawyers who are here, there are already more than 1,000 administrative claims in Argentina. And yet nothing is happening. And yet the justice system, they are not granting us the things we are asking for, such as the simple certificate of analysis of the batches. They are not granting it. And we don't understand why this enclosure is there. Okay, so this analysis was based in the brand, the batch that each person received, and the damages. Apologies.
Graduate, my apologies. He loses 1 minute of his time with the addition of the 5 extra minutes from his colleague.
Well, unfortunately, and we're going to show, this study has been based on severe and non-severe damages. When we talk about severe damages, we mean deaths, amputations, thrombosis. Non-severe damages can include fibromyalgia, fever, diarrhea, and there are also other damages that were not considered here, such as loss of vision, loss of smell. Well, what I was going to show you, but anyway, we will publish this work as well, is that the brand with the most cases, that is, with the most reports, is AstraZeneca as #1. Here it will show the different batches, the most toxic batches, where the highest number of cases were reported. There is the other brand. All of this is really important because it was never shown in Argentina. There is no statistical study on this. And if you could come closer, José, Daniel, Fabián, and give me one more minute because this is important. Well, unfortunately, I don't have time to explain. But here you can see all the health damages. Well, let's see. José Daniel Fabián is someone affected by AstraZeneca. Please, here, if you could take off your shirt. And here I want to show one of the effects caused by these vaccines. And this is not fat under the skin, ladies and gentlemen.
If you could move to the center of the stage, please, so everyone can see better. Thank you.
Over here. This was caused by the vaccine. This didn't happen to him before, and no one talks about this. Some people even laugh about it. And I would like to know what the doctors from the Ministry of Health have to say about this. We call it magnetization, but we don't really know if it is actually magnetization. He is a gardener. This didn't happen to him before. 2 doses of AstraZeneca, 2 different batches, which, well, I was going to show. But did you bring the other one? Well, let them explain to us what this is. Is this due to the materials we're finding inside? It's incredible.
Someone from the audience is asking if he has ever sprayed pesticides in the gardens where he works. He says no.
No.
Is my whole brain going away? It feels like this to me.
Well, excuse me. So,
Thank you. Well, thank you very much, Mr. José.
thank you for showing us. Now, José has to live like this for the rest of his life. What do we do, people? What do we do? And he's not the only one. We have a lot of records of magnetized people in Argentina and a lot of harm. And there is a lot of neurological damage. Here, as Dr. Gettor was saying about the inflammation, that's how it is. That's what we're seeing. That's why I wanted to show this data, to see the correlation. There are heart problems, yes. But there are people who have thrombosis and at the same time have depression, have panic attacks. Here, the neurological system is being affected and the data is overwhelming. So this needs to be shown and we need to talk about it. At this point, you can't tell me there are no health damages after the COVID vaccine. Thank you all.
Very kind of you. That was the presentation by Licenciada Lorena Diblasi. We will now proceed to introduce our next panelist. He holds a PhD in physics and is a former professor in the Department of Physics, where he taught courses in electromagnetism, semiconductor physics, quantum mechanics, and optoelectronics. He works as a consultant in biomedical and environmental engineering with extensive experience in the development of medical devices and biomaterials, as well as tissue regeneration therapies. Photo, bio, electromagnetic modulation and protection. Let us welcome Dr. Andrés Ozols.
Well, yes. Well, there is a hidden enemy that we have, which makes all the harm from what has been injected and from the environment even more effective. There is an external factor that no one has considered until now, and today the topic of nanotechnology was mentioned, as well as graphene oxide and heavy metals. And there are even nanolipid particles with a positive charge. Imagine that if you have a combination of materials in your body that are conductive, it's obvious they will respond to an electromagnetic field. We ourselves are electromagnetic beings. Our heart and our brain emit microvolt signals, thousandths of a volt. So what happens if we analyze, for example, what factors are there? This was shared with me by Dr. Garber, as a doctor in chemistry, a molecular biologist, where we are looking at the map from the Ministry of Health itself. That last slide shows the mortality from poliomyelitis in Argentina and the age at which children die. The previous map in the center shows the distribution of fourth-generation antennas, what they call 4G, which is spread throughout Argentina, and now 5G technology, which is fifth generation, is currently expanding. And you can also see maps, the first one regarding arsenic contamination. All of this is a deadly combination. We are inhaling it, we are breathing it in, we are consuming it every day, and on top of that we are immersed in a microwave oven. You don't realize it, but right now, as we are communicating, we are being exposed to electromagnetic radiation. This was developed since World War II, and the first singular event was the Spanish flu, which originated shortly after the installation of high-voltage towers. What a coincidence. Dr. Cowan explains this very well. Every time a new technology emerges, a health disaster occurs. Notice that this is a map from a photograph in the Lancet magazine, which is supposedly considered almost like the gospel of medicine, and it publishes a graph of the 4 decades leading up to 2010, where it compares in green the background radiation of the Earth at a frequency of 1 gigahertz. We have communication systems of 2.4, 54 gigahertz and 5.8, which any elementary school child knows what that means. The higher the frequency, the faster the communication speed. But what happens? In 4 decades, 40 years, up to the decade of 2010, notice that it hasn't been updated for the following 15 years. The dose of radiation we receive increased by 1 trillion times. Lisa Simpson would ask, wouldn't that be bad? 1 trillion times more than Argentina's foreign debt. That's 1 million times 1 million times 1 million, that dose we've been receiving for a while now. I don't even want to think about how high it would go if Lance published the current article. This is the network or structure of 5G technology that's spreading. It's a directed energy. And what happens after it's applied? Mortality among people increased, obviously amplifying previous damage. This is a statistic from New Zealand. Mortality increased precisely during the parallel rollout, not just with the jabs, but also with 4th and 5th generation technology. What's more, human fertility has decreased. In the most populated areas, for example in New York, fertility dropped by 80% during the lockdown period. How strange human fertility decreased. On the other hand, in urban areas, the problem isn't as severe. So one has to ask, what are the factors causing this damage? There are 2 main ones. One is oxidative stress. What causes it is precisely electromagnetic radiation. The interaction with molecules in the body generates ionization in such a way that the loss of electrons occurs. And what happens with the loss of electrons? Molecules with a positive charge appear, whether they are inorganic or organic molecules. And these act like a torrent that intoxicates the whole body at a level above normal. If we are wearing shoes as we do nowadays, we have no contact with the earth and we don't receive the flow of electrons to compensate for the missing electron, which makes the molecule neutral. Those free radicals are extremely dangerous. The other factor is what causes the breaking of DNA. Listen carefully, you don't need ionizing radiation, the kind that comes from the nuclear field, like I experienced in the 1980s, but rather small attacks on the mitochondrial system. Once the mitochondrion, which is a small organelle, there are about 1,500 of them, for example, in neurological cells, gets damaged, it causes harm to the chromosome inside the cell nucleus. And once these free radicals keep striking the DNA repeatedly, they eventually break it. Just 3 years ago, I didn't believe it myself, and I have to admit my ignorance about that. And this is an effect that has been published in many official academic publications. There are entire books on this, and it has been known since the 1910s that the secondary mechanism of aggression by free radicals produces genotoxic effects and ultimately leads to cancer. The number of cancers that is increasing worldwide is frightening, particularly brain cancers. And on the same side where we use our cell phone, what a coincidence, right? What's happening? What is going on with these radio frequency signals? They increase the frequency of the carrier signal, which are the well-known 2.45 gigahertz, 5.8, and now we're going up to 6, up to 70 gigahertz, which is what Elon Musk is aiming for. In other words, he wants to slowly cook our brains on low heat. But what is the damage that is caused? This is a book published with some references. It has 127 pages of geographical references from a bioengineering researcher about the damage caused by pulsed radiation. What do pulsed radiations cause? These are the ones contained within the radiations. They are low frequencies, as you can see here, a real signal captured on an oscilloscope from a Wi-Fi signal that you are currently using with your cell phone. A pulse is emitted every 10th of a second. That pulse reaches the cell membrane wall and opens what are called voltage-gated channels. And those voltage-gated channels are somewhat like relays, which open when I apply a voltage. But these pulsed signals are so intense that, as shown on the scale, the signal intensity increases 70 times at the moment the pulse occurs compared to the background radiation. And that's what ends up opening the channel, for example, the calcium channel, allowing calcium ions to enter, flooding the entire cell and causing damage to the mitochondria. The mitochondria produce ATP, which is the molecule that generates energy within the organism. If the mitochondria die, we die as well. And of course, the cell dies too. So what happens then? These pulse radiations were not observed in all the experiments conducted on animals, but by using real signals from a cell phone, I can cause significant damage. And why does the damage increase even more when I do what is shown next on the slide? On the right, you can see what looks like a series of flower petals. Those flower petals are called directed beams. It's military technology that's being used against civilians. This was admitted by the inventors of the military technology. It's not something I made up. I worked with both non-ionizing and ionizing radiation. I also worked with very high-energy lasers in photolithography for medical use in Fort Collins. If that later ended up being used for microchips, I don't know, maybe I'm to blame. So there are a series of symptoms that are occurring. Mitochondrial damage, endothelial inflammation, something Dr. Enrique Ferracani emphasized to me a lot. He published an article where he links the well-known COVID with the issue of radiation. He describes it as an acute idiopathic syndrome, meaning a syndrome of unknown origin, but he lists it as another symptom. Currently, the number of studies correlating COVID symptoms, which are identical to endothelial inflammation, is increasing. The endothelium is the inner layer of blood vessels, and when it narrows, imagine a capillary going to the lungs, it causes acute respiratory syndrome. What a coincidence, right? Because the blood vessel closed up, and also if I put more strain on the area, I end up rupturing the endothelium, which causes bleeding, and once the bleeding occurs, the healing process begins, which is fibrosis. And the fibrosis blocks the capillaries that go to the lungs, which leads to low oxygen saturation. And there's also another thing, another situation, which is that the red blood cells clump together due to the rouleau effect, which means the red blood cells stick to each other. With just 10 to 15 minutes of exposure to the radiation from a cell phone, a healthy person can experience a case of blood vessel obstruction. And this has been observed and filmed, and it was published last year. So what happens? Cancer cases are increasing. This is a study that was done using 2 sets of statistics from different years in Sweden, where the correlation is shown using the Bradford Hill criteria, which is always the doctor observes me and then establishes the correlation between the increase in gliomas, brain cancers, which rises in relation to the number of years of cell phone use. So using pathological data from diagnosed people, they conducted a survey. How many hours are you using your cell phone? Since when? Under what conditions? It turns out that the probability of developing a brain glioma after 20 years of cell phone use is 100%. Do you understand how serious this problem is? It's 70% if we use it a smaller number of times. And there's a comparative chart. This is not fiction, it's a sad reality. They're killing us with the reaction. This is a comparative chart made with an ultrasound specialist where a healthy person in the popliteal vein of the knee, after exposing the patient to 10 minutes of cell phone exposure, begins to develop blood clots. In other words, you can make the diagnosis live without needing to take a blood sample as Marcela had suggested. You can take a blood sample, put a cell phone next to it, inside a Faraday cage for isolation, and you'll see that the blood starts to clot. What's more, we saw this in Cordoba. Even I was surprised myself. Who has their cell phone on? And several people admitted they had it on when we wanted to observe another effect. Indeed, red blood cells are electrical conductors. Hemoglobin has iron at its core, which is a conductor.
Dr. Ozols, please excuse me, you have 1 minute left.
All right. The 1996 regulations from ENACOM, which is the Radiation Regulation Center, allow 1 milliwatt of power per square centimeter of our skin. Do you know how much we're exposed to when we travel on a bus? Never before. And then people are surprised when someone has a heart attack or when the damage caused by vaccines is intensified. There are videos recorded of people who are struck down while using a cell phone. It's been recorded. It's not just something out of a horror or science fiction movie. So they're violating, meaning the ENACOM regulations haven't been updated because they don't want to listen to Dr. Valcarce from the state or Dr. Doucet submitting reports, and it turns out that the people at ENACOM completely ignore basic biology. They don't want to listen because I could be an excellent salesperson for the entire telecommunication system since I know the technology and I develop it, but I also need to know about biology when I start giving my opinion. I have to start studying, and that's why I'm in the biomedical field. This led to me being called nicknames like anti-vaxxer, and they even added flat earther to make it more emphatic. I'm forbidden from giving this talk at the Faculty of Engineering. Dr.
Sol, we must thank you for your time and for your presentation. You have been very kind. As we always say, please excuse the interruption, but we need everyone to have a chance to present.
In the prologue, you'll find that Milei was aware of the problem, and you can see it now. Pandenomics. Check out the prologue.
Pandenomics, Xavier Milei. Thank you very much. Let's welcome our next speaker. She is a physician specializing in geriatrics with training in pain medicine and integrative medicine, including orthomolecular therapy, platelet-rich plasma, ozone therapy, and laser therapy for pain management. She was the head of the Provincial Geriatric Center of Tierra del Fuego and currently works in the private sector. Please welcome Dr. Viviana Lenz.
Well, thank you. Good evening. I want to thank everyone here, my fellow fighters, and of course, Congresswoman Quiroz. Thank you. Well, I'm going to tell you, can you hear me well from there, right? Briefly, the case of 2 patients, obviously there are many more, represents the vast majority of patients who have been poisoned because none of them knew the real contents. Otherwise, they wouldn't have put poison on themselves, and they certainly didn't know the adverse effects in the short, medium, and long term. The first patient, the 2 patients, that is, I have the consent of the family members and the patient to discuss these cases. José Olivares is a patient who sadly is no longer with us today. He was 80 years old with chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, chronic gastritis, geriatric syndrome, insomnia, mostly, nothing major, no other pathological history. When he came to see me, he was admitted in April of this year for epigastric discomfort, accompanied by his daughters. And José, of course, chose to undergo chemotherapy treatment. Right? Chemotherapy. 3 cycles, and he also received complementary treatments with me. The diagnosis, as I just mentioned, was a grade 4 invasive adenocarcinoma of the gastroesophageal mucosa with metastases in the lungs and also in the liver. That was the patient's diagnosis. In other words, it behaved like a turbo cancer because within 3 months, José was gone. What do we have in terms of medical history? Well, the COVID injections, 2 Sputnik and 1 Pfizer. That's the distinguishing detail, so to speak. How did it behave? Well, from the moment he had the diagnosis, because he came to see me already diagnosed, he began to experience severe epigastric pain. Functional class 4 dyspnea, asthenia, adynamia, and in his final days he was bedridden because he couldn't walk, as walking was difficult for him, causing a lot of pain and shortness of breath. And he passed away in his daughter's arms on the way to the hospital. The ambulance came to the house without a doctor, and within a few minutes, the patient passed away. This is the reason why the case went to court. This is the case number 46,377/2025. To this day, justice is still pending because justice is asleep. With the diagnosis, an autopsy was performed. What was the diagnosis? A massive pulmonary thromboembolism. What was found? Thrombi were found in the right and left pulmonary arteries, in the pulmonary veins, in the aortic arch, and in the right atrium. In other words, it was a massive thrombus and also pleural effusion. Well, with all this, we are waiting. That is the patient José and Raquel, who was my patient. Well, that's one of many patients with a sudden onset of clinical symptoms, with a diagnosis, and we practically don't even have time to provide either conventional or unconventional medicine. The patient dies. The second case is that of a well-known patient, Mirta Villalba, 53 years old. She had already been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis in 2016. The only pathological history was herniated discs with hernioplasty. She had no other medical history, a completely healthy patient with full or partial independence in daily life activities. She was a patient who used to run, athletic, healthy. Well, remember that I am in Tierra del Fuego, and to travel we had to go by plane or by land, but cross several borders. In both cases, they required us to have a complete vaccination card. And also, the doctors who were treating her here in Buenos Aires, since she already had neurologists here, insisted that she absolutely had to get the COVID shot. So they coerced her. She didn't want to get vaccinated. She got the shots. The first was Sputnik and the second was Moderna. She had no issues with the Sputnik, but she did with the Moderna. 15 days later, she developed a full-blown case of shortness of breath, cognitive disturbances, and fever. She had gait disturbances, spasticity, in other words, her multiple sclerosis, which had been stable and she was doing perfectly, flared up again. That led to Mirta being admitted to a private clinic. Well, there they stabilized her. She requested to return to Buenos Aires. She came to Buenos Aires, and in Buenos Aires, all the doctors who saw her agreed that Mirta's condition was exacerbated by the COVID injection. That's in the record. It's in the medical records and in all the certificates from her attending physicians. They agreed that the event was exacerbated by the vaccine, the COVID injection. Well, Mirta returns to, that is the Xavier. Mirta returns to Tierra del Fuego in poor condition. Mirta needed a wheelchair with her husband's help because she couldn't do anything at all. She couldn't walk. And well, at that moment, in a certain situation, Mirta began to decompensate. She has health insurance. What happens? The health insurance would not take responsibility for Mirta's hospitalization or treatment. She obviously needed to be hospitalized, which is why we went to the hospital, but the hospital also didn't want to take responsibility for Mirta because she had health insurance. In other words, they were just passing the buck back and forth, and in the end we had to file several complaints so that Mirta could be admitted to the hospital. Well, even while she was hospitalized, even in intensive care, I accompanied her husband to file the legal complaint. Another case that went to court where Judge Cecilia Cataldo and Chief Prosecutor Bramati, I'm going to name them because they dismissed Mirta's case, our lawyer, Dr. Luciani, appealed, and a few days ago he informed me that the case was dismissed. So what does that mean? It means that the vast majority of patients today are being abandoned. After having been poisoned, today they continue to be made invisible and abandoned by the state. And what about the state? The justice system, right? And obviously the politicians who signed this, who put us in this situation. Well, there is Mirta in a wheelchair. Mirta, well, that's another case we won't have time for, but there's also electromagnetism involved. I'd like you to show me the other part if possible, please.
Let's ask the multimedia team, please, for the second part of the material, if possible.
Yes, well, what I'm going to show you now is going to be quick. A blood sample from my clinic patients who were injected with the COVID vaccines. This is a normal blood sample. The red blood cells are nice and round. The erythrocytes, a white blood cell, and there are some platelets. That's what normal blood should look like in the vast majority of patients, in everyone really. Well, once these injections are administered, you can observe this with a simple optical microscope, a bright field or dark field optical microscope, using just a single drop of blood from the finger. You can see it, and as the days go by, these samples start to change. What can you observe? Well, you see foreign bodies that shouldn't be there under any circumstances because they later cause all the diseases we already know about. Thromboembolism, stroke, myocarditis, pericarditis, heart attack, cancer, everything we already know. So what do you see? You see these bubbles, which are microbubbles, microspheres. Some people refer to them as microbots because we're looking through an optical microscope. Otherwise, they'd be called nanobots, with contents inside them that, due to various internal and external factors, such as pH, temperature, electromagnetic radiation, etc., are released. These microspheres, the previous ones, come in different shapes and sizes, and some even exhibit fluorescence. And they are coated with a hydrogel that is three-dimensional and porous, which has photovoltaic properties, among others. Well, there's a lot to discuss on this topic, and there's also a lot of literature available. These are a kind of microfibers, microtubules, which are also scattered in various colors and sizes. The number of structures that shouldn't be there is truly impressive. Notice it even has fluorescence, and this is the famous graphene oxide. Why do I say it's graphene oxide? Because it's the same thing being observed all over the world in the same COVID injections and in patients' blood, not only in the blood but also in the urine. There are different shapes, sizes, and even colors. Basically, that's what I wanted to show you. There's much more to say about the topic of blood and urine. You can even see microcircuits. All of this is connected to antennas, as the doctor explained, with electromagnetic radiation. We know this leads us to artificial intelligence and so on and so forth. Transhumanism, hybridization. Well, thank you. There you see her. Thank you very much for listening. And the doctor, I want to pay a small tribute to Dr. Miriam Dietrich, a lawyer. Many of you will know her. A great fighter who passed away this year precisely from cancer. She was not inoculated, but we already know there are other factors at play here. Thank you very
much. Very kind of you. Let's welcome Dr. José Luis Rogelio Gettor, National License Number 68,897, Professional License Number 5,487. Dr. José Luis Rogelio Gettor is a physician specialized in emergency medicine, graduated from the University of Buenos Aires in 1984. He has served as a civilian physician for the Argentine Navy. He is an auditor for IOSE and a regular attendee in internal medicine at Churuca Vizca Hospital. Since 2006, he has been the medical director of AME private ambulances in the same city. So let's welcome Dr. José Luis Rogelio Gettor.
Thank you very much, Guillermo. If we have the first image, I am going to talk about how language has been manipulated, how speech has been manipulated, and how this is a fundamental element when it comes to understanding reality. If we call good things bad and bad things good, everything changes. It changes completely. I have brought 4 screenshots. I have the links that connect to these screens, which are from the Centers for Disease Control in the United States. The CDC, the famous CDC, have become more famous than ever in these past few years. And I ask you to pay attention to the date, which is in the upper right corner in black and yellow. The first screenshot, they keep updating, the CDC keeps updating and changing certain definitions. This is like a medical dictionary, like the dictionary of the Royal Spanish Academy. If I change the meaning of a word, I can even change a person's life. I could even sentence someone to death just by changing the meaning of a single word. What did the CDC or the US CDC say on July 9th, 2014? There were several definitions, but as the definition of vaccination, pay attention. It said injection of a dead or weakened infectious organism to prevent disease. This is what we studied in medical school. That vaccination meant introducing a tiny bit of the disease, so to speak, so that our body would develop defenses and be prepared for a future infection just in case it came. This happened in July 2014, but let's go to the next image. Guillermo, please, which is from October 10th, 2014. There it is. On October 10th, 2014, regarding the word vaccination, the concept changes. It's not just a word that changes, almost everything changes. It says that it's the act of introducing a vaccine. It no longer mentions infectious agents, dead or weakened. The act of introducing a vaccine into the body to produce immunity to a specific disease. This definition lasted from October 10th, 2014, next slide please, until September 1st, 2021. For almost 7 years, the definition of vaccination, I repeat, was the act of introducing a vaccine into the body to produce immunity to a disease. To a specific disease. If we look at what they're going to put into your body, which is a vaccine is a product that stimulates the immune system. What happens the next day? Let's move on to the last image. It doesn't work. Well, I'll read it myself. The next day, where it says vaccination, the act of introducing a vaccine into the body to produce immunity, the vaccine is described as a product. The next day, on September 2nd, we have to... The medical dictionary changes, it keeps changing, and now it says it's the act of introducing a vaccine into the body to produce protection. So up until September 1st, 2021, it was to produce immunity, but starting September 2nd, it's to produce protection. It's like telling people, look, first it was to prevent, like, we're going to prevent the rain, so it doesn't get us wet. Then we're going to immunize ourselves against the rain, we'll put on some silicone so it doesn't harm us. And then, after that, we just protect ourselves. We go out with a raincoat, an umbrella, a piece of cardboard, or whatever. In other words, changing the terminology is extremely serious because we're legislating based on this terminology. So, if we say that the vaccine immunizes, it means that we're assuring the person that they will be protected and nothing will happen to them if they get infected, in quotes. But if it only protects, well, I can protect myself by taking vitamin C, exercising, fasting, or any other measure. So we can't legislate by forcing people to protect themselves according to a vocabulary that changes all the time. Are you following me? In other words, we change the dictionary as we please, as my colleagues have already said, according to the interests of the pharmaceutical companies, because let's remember that the WHO, as has been mentioned before, is 85% funded by private laboratories. That has been happening since 1998 with the director of the WHO, Gro Harlem Brundtland, a Norwegian who was president of Norway 2 or 3 times, that is, prime minister, and who opened the door for the pharmaceutical companies to contribute their money under the conditions set by the companies that they would provide those funds and the medical practices they themselves would commission would be carried out. In other words, beginning specifically in 1998, and these facts, the source is in the WHO's Red Book 2, published by Cesar Velázquez, who was a Colombian medical colleague and spent 20 years in charge of the Department of Medicines at the World Health Organization, also known as the WHO. He publishes that important book and thoroughly explains in detail how Gro Harlem Brundtland, who was the Director General at the time, fundamentally changed the flow of money coming into the WHO. In other words, the WHO is not a public entity. It's honestly just a rubber stamp for international pharmaceutical companies. I'm running out of time, but well, I don't know, Guillermo, if you have the audio, I wanted you all to listen to Dr. Almudena Zaragoza talk about viruses so we can learn a bit about what viruses actually are. It seems that in Spain they study one kind of medicine, and here in Argentina it seems like we study something else entirely. If we have the audio and can play it.
Good morning, I'm Almudena Zaragoza. I have a degree in biology from the Autonomous University of Madrid. Today I'm going to explain what a virus is, because even though everyone talks about viruses, most people don't actually know what they are. And I think it's vitally important to explain it, because maybe then people will start to understand some things from a different perspective. Viruses are nothing more than biological messages. They are a set of proteins called nucleotides. These nucleotides are like letters that join together to form syllables, which in turn form words, sentences, and paragraphs. Viruses have the most varied set of types of genetic material conformations, different kinds of messages. They are experts at telling things. There are DNA and RNA viruses, single-stranded or double-stranded, with positive or negative polarity, to determine whether they are read from right to left or the other way around. Their total abundance on Earth is simply overwhelming. If we were to send one virus from Earth to each star in the universe, we would have to do it 100 million times to send them all. In estimated numbers, there are on the order of 1 billion trillion. In humans, it is estimated that there are 1 billion viral particles per gram of feces. They are the most abundant biological entities on Earth. In birds and mammals alone, there are approximately 2 million of them yet to be discovered. Wherever there is life, viruses exist. They are part of the planet's biogeochemical cycles. They contribute to the water cycle through cloud nucleation. They support life in the ocean. They inserted photosynthesis genes into bacteria, promoting the production of atmospheric oxygen. They are the largest reservoir of genetic information and proteins that exists. They are the origin of life, the builders of the genomes of living beings. In humans, we can find members of the human virome, human endogenous retroviruses, and members of the human transcriptome that are derived from the former. All of these are fragments of genetic information of viral origin that are part of us as living beings and fulfill a wide variety of functions. The human virome is the viral component of the human microbiome. That is, microbial ecosystems that live in our bodies, on our skin, and in our mucous membranes. Of these, which are made up of bacteria and viruses, viruses are particularly abundant, about 25 times more than bacteria. They are abundant on the skin and mucous membranes, serve as a protective barrier for homeostasis, and also participate in the innate immune response that is not dependent on the host. They are of the bacteriophage type, and they transport and inject information between the bacteria in our body to tell them what to do at any given moment, and to regulate complex processes that are vital for the organism's good health. Endogenous retroviruses, on the other hand, are sequences of viral origin that are permanently inserted into our genome, making up approximately 10% of all our genetic material. But in addition, DNA transposable elements, which make up 3% of our genetic information, SINE sequences, which account for 14% of our genome, and line sequences, which also make up 18%, all have a viral origin. As of today, we must know that the function of a large part of the information carried by our genome, which has been called the dark zone, is still unknown. This accounts for 55% of the total information in our genome. Just think about how much information we don't know about our own being. But even this supposed darkness seems to also contain viral sequences, since the existence of components of the human transcriptome has been confirmed within it. The human transcriptome is a set of RNA signaling molecules, not DNA, that we have in our bodies. They are responsible for sending messages that trigger physiological processes in the body. And how are these messages sent? Well, the messages, which are encoded in the form of nuclear DNA, are transcribed into RNA, and the same cell, with its complex cellular machinery, wraps them in capsids that can be protein-based or may also contain lipids. And these viruses, our messengers, go from being in an intracellular phase to an extracellular phase. That is, they were embedded in the cell's genetic material, but once they are transcribed into RNA and encapsulated, they move into a phase known as the extracellular phase. To travel to their destination, the proteins in the viral envelopes recognize other proteins called membrane receptors, which are found on other cells that are meant to receive the message. In any act of communication, obviously, there must be a sender and a receiver. All the information about these viral senders and receivers is encoded in human chromosomes. Therefore, viruses are essentially a complex network for initiating or terminating vital processes in our bodies, which are started by the cells themselves using viruses as information capsules for sending messages that are received by other groups of cells in the organism. I'm sure that, in fact, until today you hadn't heard this explanation, which is actually a completely objective explanation based on biology. As a matter of fact, this explanation is grounded in biological science, without any kind of interpretation. When we read books or listen to the media, we realize that interpretation is extremely important because it introduces terms that are actually beliefs and by no means biological facts, such as the terms infection, pathogen, contagion. When a virus goes from one cell to another to transfer information, this interpretation of biology, okay? Which is not real biology, calls this exchange of information an infection. Just like that, for no real reason. Therefore, a virus obviously must be a pathogen. Why? Because it must be an infectious agent that causes disease. And therefore, it must be able to be transmitted to other people.
Stop recording.
It doesn't sound right, does it? But the big question in all of this is, for what exact purpose and with what meaning does our own biological code as living beings exist?
How would we be producing germs ourselves? Viruses are in our cells. So it's very important, as Dr. Zaragoza said, the interpretation. Viruses are messengers. And if we are the ones who make viruses, the doctors here in medical school, we were taught that viruses were RNA and DNA, meaning they had human genetic material. So how is it that they come from outside to infect us? No, we are the ones who make viruses. This has been known since the 19th century. This is hidden information. And it was developed by Dr. Pierre-Jacques-Antoine Béchamp in France, who had a traitorous student named Louis Pasteur. And today the world lives on its knees for not following Pierre-Jacques-Antoine Béchamp. Ladies and gentlemen, let's make laws that force people to take a product that isn't even a product anymore. It's now a preparation according to the latest information because these people influence all the medical dictionaries. So as Dr. Razona said, let's use the law to help people and not to please some doctors in positions of authority who have never even looked through a microscope.
Many thanks to Dr. José Luis Rogelio Gettor for this presentation, for his time. We will now move on to another of our speakers. She is a pediatrician who completed her residency at Ricardo Gutierrez Children's Hospital and is a lifetime member of the Argentine Society of Pediatrics. She graduated as a homeopathic doctor from the Tomás Pachero Argentine Homeopathic Medical School in 1990. She has taught at both that institution and the Argentine Homeopathic Association. She has 45 years of practice, uninterrupted in pediatrics. We welcome Dr. Ana Szabó. We kindly ask the multimedia team, the material is over there. Thank you very much.
Well, good evening. Everyone is already tired. First of all, I want to thank, obviously, Marilú Quiroz and Martín Menem for this opportunity they have given me. For so long, we've been asking and fighting for this ever since December 2018, when this depraved law making vaccines mandatory was enacted. And I also want to thank all the wonderful people I've met thanks to this whole issue and the topic of COVID, people I've connected with online and today have met in person, because thanks to all these networks we've built, we've made it here today. And we've supported each other, haven't we? We've supported each other emotionally and scientifically. I'm going to keep it very simple. I'm going to rush because I had prepared for 15 minutes. What I'm going to talk about are very basic things, like for kindergarten, using logic and common sense. Just a few concepts that obviously have already been mentioned throughout all the talks. But while I want to emphasize them a little, I want to emphasize them. First of all types of vaccines have physical, chemical, and biological effects on the human body. We know this. They alter its composition and functioning. Therefore, vaccines should be considered as a medication. All right, so every single medication or vaccine must be properly prescribed by a responsible, qualified doctor and in a completely appropriate and regulated manner, individualized way for each patient. For a doctor to prescribe a medication or a vaccine, they first have to assess whether the patient actually needs what is being prescribed, whether it will benefit their health or not, if there is any risk of adverse effects, and if the patient has any contraindications to receiving it. To do this, they have to read the medication or vaccines package insert. Clearly, many pediatricians do not read the vaccine package inserts. On the other hand, the doctor is obligated to provide the patient with complete information about the real possible benefits and the real potential adverse effects, all in accordance with the Informed Consent Law 26529 from the year 2009. Now, even though the doctor provides the information, it is the patient who has the right to decide whether to accept or not the doctor's prescription. Because their body belongs to them and they are responsible for their children's bodies until those children become adults. In the Hippocratic Oath, doctors swear to act in the best possible way, according to the knowledge we have at the time we treat the patient. In other words, if we are unaware of something and make a mistake out of ignorance, well, once we know, once we have that new concept and have learned it, we can no longer make the same mistake twice. Because let's say in the Hippocratic Oath we commit to first, do no harm, primum non nocere. That's what someone also mentioned, that public health should do that, right? For this, the doctor has to observe the patient, observe what is happening, and gather information from different sources. Argentinian children receive an exorbitant number of vaccines starting from pregnancy, and there is no health reason for this. Absolutely none, I assure you. I have been studying this topic for many years, and there is no evaluation of the possible harms. For example, pregnant women currently receive 10 antigens. For those who are not doctors, it's important to distinguish between the vaccine, which is the injection itself, and the number of antigens it contains. For example, the pneumococcal vaccine, which is branded as Prevena 13, contains 13 antigens, and now they are developing one with 18 or 20. All right, so the pregnant woman receives 10 antigens. The total number of injections administered up to around age 15 is about 42 shots, though this can vary if additional campaigns are added, and now there are more and more campaigns being carried out, which they are no longer given as before when they were for unvaccinated children. Now they are given to those who are already vaccinated. This also applies to oral vaccines that are given, like the rotavirus vaccine, for example. The total number of antigens administered up to age 15 is more than 160. The violence that this represents for the immune system. Now, what are the conditions for deciding to research and recommend a vaccine? There are three conditions. One, necessity, another, effectiveness, and another, safety. Is it necessary to vaccinate children against certain diseases? Are vaccines effective? Are vaccines safe? Referring to the fact that they will not cause greater harm than what we are trying to prevent. Necessity arises from severity of a disease, meaning it is a disease that causes death and serious after effects with a high frequency, and that there is no treatment at all for that disease. This, of course, is not the case with COVID, since we know there was treatment, nor is it the case for most of the diseases for which vaccines are given. The effectiveness of a vaccine, it is the ability of that vaccine to prevent infection and to reduce the lethality caused by the disease it is intended to prevent. All existing vaccines were evaluated based on their efficacy and not their effectiveness, except for COVID, because I have never seen a patient ask for COVID antibodies. A swab is enough. So efficacy only measures the rise of specific antibodies in the blood, which is called humoral immunity, but this in no way guarantees that the vaccine is effective, meaning that it produces immunity. True immunity is found in cellular memory, antigenic memory at the tissue level, and that is cellular immunity. And this has never been measured. For ethical reasons, it is also not possible to evaluate whether vaccinated people really have a higher risk or not of contracting a disease, since you would have to put all the people in a room with the virus, both vaccinated and unvaccinated, and see who gets sick. All right, safety. To declare a vaccine or any medication as safe, it must be free from significant adverse effects, and its use must offer a risk-benefit ratio that is clearly favorable to the benefit. None of the COVID vaccines, nor those on the regular schedule, meet this requirement. Absolutely none, I can assure you of that. It has been widely proven in numerous studies that unvaccinated children are much healthier than vaccinated ones. I have a quote here, I have others, but I'm going to keep going because I want to be able to finish. Personally, I can confirm this because I do not recommend vaccines to any child or any pregnant woman. And for those who come and want to get vaccinated, I provide information. What I do is give information because information is light. When you have light, it illuminates the path and you can make a better decision. So what happens with reports of vaccine injuries, the so-called vis-a-vis and from the soul? Parents do not have the right to report. Only a medical professional can do it. And if most doctors deny vaccine side effects, we are not going to have any reports. So the absence of reports is not evidence of the absence of harm as they want us to believe. VAERS in the United States acknowledges that only 1% of vaccine injuries are reported, and even with such a low percentage, there are thousands and thousands of reports of people harmed both by the COVID vaccine and by those on the regular schedule. Just imagine what it's like in our country. I don't think we even reach, I don't know what the percentage would be. In conclusion, vaccines are not necessary, not effective, and not safe, both the COVID vaccine and those on the regular schedule. They don't meet any of the conditions to be recommended, let alone to be made mandatory. So Law 27.491 should be repealed, and immediately. This is... I don't even have to appeal to the legal side, which I don't handle because I'm not a lawyer. It's simply a matter of common sense that's obvious to anyone. That's all. It's just logic and common sense. That's it. Discrimination against unvaccinated children must end. I've had cases where, for example, in a kindergarten, parents reported a mother because they found out her daughter wasn't vaccinated, and this mother had to flee in fear and hide, but the same parents were the ones who reported her. Those who choose to get vaccinated have the right to do so. Everyone has their own beliefs. They have their own fears. There are many people who are very fearful and want to get vaccinated, and well, it's fine for them to do so, but they have absolutely no right to force vaccination on those who do not wish to be vaccinated. Medical prescriptions should be in the hands of doctors, not legislators. And a doctor, going back to the beginning, must prescribe vaccines only if they truly believe they are beneficial, if they have researched the subject, and if not, like I used to vaccinate when I was a resident at the Children's Hospital, and a mother from the neighborhood would come in And if her child hadn't received the BCG vaccine, I would scold her. Now I ask them, please don't give it to them. I mean, but why, doctor?
Sorry to interrupt, but I have to inform you that our time is up.
Perfect, that's fine. So I think that's it. We're done here? Can I say one last thing? We pediatricians have the right to practice our profession calmly and not like now, where we have to come up with exemptions to figure out how to protect our patients from not being vaccinated. Please let us work in peace. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You've been very kind, Dr. Szabó.
Next, we will give the floor to Dr. Mario Borini. He is a physician, national license number 33200, specialist in internal medicine with a diploma in public health and an epidemiologist with additional training in research methodology. He was a full professor of public health at the University of Buenos Aires from 2003 to 2008 and received the National Academy of Medicine Award for his academic and scientific work. We repeat the number enabled for questions at the end of panel number 1, 011 5011 9782. We also thank the Argentine National Congress, Annex Honorable Chamber of Deputies of the Nation for the live broadcast on the official channels. Once again, we welcome Dr. Mario Borini.
Thank you very much. Just imagine the honor of being able to share this in one of the highest places of the national government, when we ourselves have been subjected to tremendous censorship with arrests, intimidation, and beatings for many colleagues in Rosario, and then individually in numerous circumstances that they have instigated. Censorship and intimidation instead of debate. The same energy or even less could have been saved with a debate that never took place. Well, I have divided the presentation with some graphic presentation later into 3 aspects. First, the content, which is the stated goal from the beginning. And title of this event, then the effects, and finally the context in which this has developed. Regarding the content, my colleagues have already elaborated on the aspects related to organic presence in the case of Bota and the presence of inorganic elements in the case of Sangorrín. Well, regarding this search to understand what has happened, I believe that if someone reads Law 27,573 and still believes that this was worthwhile, well, it's not even worth discussing. That law, just by reading it and finding confidentiality, immunity for laboratories, the loss of judicial sovereignty in Argentina, one says, well, that's the end of the discussion. What doctor is going to take the initiative to recommend or approve the inoculation? So I think that pretty much puts an end to the debates. At first, you get caught up in arguments with people who debate this, and then I say, have you read Law 27,573? If they tell me no, I tell them to read the law and see what they think. And if they have read it, I ask them, and if nothing in the law moves them, I found that it's not worth it because that already seems sufficient. As for the evidence, if you ask those who propose these policies to show you evidence of a universal lockdown during an epidemic, they don't have it. There is not a single article or book that proposes locking up healthy people, that is a universal lockdown during an epidemic. Some countries echoed this because they did not have a total quarantine. Although lockdowns predominated among the 200 countries, there were countries like Japan, Hong Kong, Iceland, and Taiwan that did not resort to panic and lockdowns. And others implemented targeted lockdowns. So it's not true that it was the only measure, and those countries do not appear worse than Argentina in the ranking of COVID mortality rates. So this is disproven by the statistics simply because of that. If you accept the official statistics, which are the ones we have since we don't have our own universal system to compete with the universal system they've proposed, it turns out it's not even worth arguing too much. Because with their own data, they lose the argument. That's why there was no debate. As for the experts, to go a bit deeper, the experts are infectious disease specialists. If this was a zoonosis, why wasn't there a veterinarian? There was no epidemiologist, no demographer, even though it was known that society was stratified into segments with greater and lesser vulnerability. There was no social scientist, and if they talked about stay at home, which is disqualifying in any case, there's no way to defend that language in any branch of the social sciences. It's a directive order that you would never give to an adult. We have expert infectologists who believe that statistics explain themselves and used to scare us with the numbers. Well, a significant number of those infectologists belong to the pharmaceutical industry. They are advisors to the pharmaceutical industry, but not just any industry, specifically the vaccine-producing industry. A very large proportion of them are advisors to laboratories that produce vaccines. Another thing is about us regaining our sovereignty and deciding what we can do about this. If you look at the 2024 budget in Argentina, you'll see that the contribution from each of us for 15 endemic epidemic diseases, including Chagas, dengue, and malaria, is 66 pesos per person per year. This clearly shows just how concerned the government is about promoting an active approach in these circumstances. The inorganic components were published by the Club del Tango. Does that ring a bell? Year 21, August, that's when Marcela was there. From the group of Argentine multidisciplinary epidemiologists, Gustavo Fano is here with us. Why did they use the name Club del Tango? The repression was so intense that they had to resort to that pseudonym. So why do they believe in vaccination if we have all this background? How can an official be surprised that vaccination rates are dropping in Argentina and that only 50% of children are vaccinated by age 5? However, this decline doesn't seem to be decisive. Argentina, with that decline, which is much greater than in the United States and Canada, had 100 cases of measles. The United States, 1,500, and Canada, 4,500. So, with much higher coverage, they have 40 times more measles than Argentina, and here they're trying to sell us concern about measles. Now we're starting again with another disease. How long will this go on? The effects. Argentina didn't do well. It ranked 6th out of 200 countries, the 6th worst place. In mortality rate from the disease, we claim to be addressing with COVID. Assuming that we accept that the official statistics reflect that situation, but we don't have any other statistics of our own. And in Latin America, out of 30 countries, we're either the 2nd or 3rd worst, depending on whether it's Peru, Brazil, Argentina, or just Peru, Argentina directly, among the worst. Mortality now, let's move on to the appendix. If we can speed up a bit, I'll skip some charts so we can stay on schedule. Let's skip several. Perfect. Let's skip several. Let's skip several. Take a look. You might not notice it much because the size doesn't allow it, but I'll explain it to you. I've highlighted it in yellow. Argentina's historical series is 340,000 deaths in the 5 years prior to this so-called pandemic. 340,000 in 2020, there was indeed higher mortality, 370,000. But what's surprising is that at the end of 2020, vaccination began here and around the world in December or January, and the mortality in Argentina, which had increased by 30,000 cases. In 2020, now with vaccination, it increases by 60,000 cases in 2021 compared to 2020. So, in 2021, the year of vaccination, there are 60,000 more deaths than in the year when this episode began. The curves are parallel. Vaccination goes up, mortality goes up as well. They're parallel, not just here, but all over the world. That mortality, it's very interesting, below it's indicated has a non-COVID mortality. Curiously, non-COVID mortality intensifies in 2022 compared to 2021, the year of vaccination.
Doctor, may I briefly interrupt to let you know you have 2 minutes left for your presentation.
This means that in 2022, we had more non-COVID deaths than in 2021. Did the lockdown have an influence? Did vaccination and its delayed effects have an influence? None of this has been investigated by the government. It's a simple investigation, cases and controls. They didn't do it. We've been distracted by the aspects, consequences, and context. We've been distracted by biological and technical issues. Meanwhile, they were picking our pockets. The poor lost 30% of their income, while the richest 1% increased their income by 30% in 2020. This means that we are caught up in technical distractions while things are happening on the economic, political, and institutional levels. This is not a health crisis. It's a systemic, institutional, and socio-economic crisis with loss of sovereignty, unemployment, impoverishment, debt, and corruption. This Congress please not end here. In 2020, just 6 days after the quarantine began, I took a big risk and published The Reign of the Coronavirus. It was anticipated that this issue of immunity and vaccination was going to happen, the lack of use of epidemiology, and the problem of the social sciences being absent from all of this. The ones who got the prediction wrong were them who forecasted 40 million deaths in the first year, but there were 1,400,000. Reality is becoming less and less invisible to the eyes.
Thank you very much. Well, let's continue then with panel number 2. At this point, it's time to give the floor to someone who is a medical epidemiologist, a graduate of the Juan Lazarte Institute at the Faculty of Medicine in Rosario. He was a university professor and advisor to the Public Health Commission of the National Chamber of Deputies and an epidemiologist for the municipality of Rosario. He is the co-author of Health in Quarantine in Search of the Truth and Delta Wantinsuyu to the Sea of Anzanusa, in addition to being the founder of the Argentine Epidemiologist Organization. We welcome Dr. Ramiro Alberto Salazar Cisneros. 10 minutes of ongoing exposure.
Well, good afternoon. Thank you so very much for this kind invitation. And I truly want to say that, let's say together, we should all pay a heartfelt tribute to everyone who is graciously present here today, and also to those who unfortunately could not come, but who truly should also be here. Perhaps because the sheer number of people significantly exceeded the venue's maximum capacity. That might indeed be the primary reason. But the immense courage and unwavering bravery that everyone here has profoundly shown over this significant period of time, specifically since the year 2020 until this very moment now, in diligently protecting and steadfastly defending your beloved family and your cherished community. I firmly believe that everyone present here has undoubtedly faced significant persecution, considerable coercion, and immense pressure. Some even ended up in jail, and legal cases were brought against them. Even though they were acquitted, but still the pressure from those in power, that immense and overwhelming magnitude with all its countless unseen and insidious hands, relentlessly reaching out to each and every person with a deeply personalized and profound sense of intimidation. And we have indeed experienced this, and regrettably, we are still experiencing it even today in this very moment. There are people who lost their jobs. There are many individuals who tragically lost the precious chance to be with their beloved families during incredibly difficult times. And well, there is a complex and evolving situation that has significantly developed from 2020 until now, a critical issue which we have been consistently denouncing from the very beginning. We started doing this on February 15th, 2020. When we initially met before the official emergency decree was declared, because something significant was truly catching our collective attention, something entirely new and unprecedented, which was a profound change in the fundamental intent of health services. Why do I say this? Because normally, as epidemiologists and public health professionals, we observe the phenomena of health and disease in the population. And we also observe how health services respond to health problems in the population. And why do we need to observe both phenomena? Because many times, in trying to prevent harm to health, we end up causing even greater harm to the health of the population. Harm caused by prevention. Harm because tools were used that were not appropriate for that particular health problem. And I am referring in general to the way health services have historically addressed health problems in the population. Historically, there was never a terrorizing discourse from the state aimed at frightening the population about a disease. This was indeed a completely new phenomenon, a truly novel intention, and a distinctly different behavior emerging from health services. And it was not just happening exclusively within our own country. It came as a directive from abroad. And you could see everyone lining up like little ducks to follow those orders. This was seen in every country, and it was evident that practically Argentina, like many other countries, had no health sovereignty. What does this mean? That the entire disease is comprehensively defined abroad, the precise diagnostic method is meticulously defined abroad, the essential reagent kit, which is crucial to accurately determine whether someone is truly sick or perfectly healthy, is thoroughly defined and subsequently brought in from abroad. And the complete treatment protocol is also firmly established by foreign entities and organizations. So here, what are we then? A branch office that simply follows what comes from abroad. So why do we have a Ministry of Health? Why do we have an ANMAT? Why do we have so many other services? The title of this meeting is well chosen and at the same time quite striking, because asking what vaccines contain? This question, which would be the most natural thing in the world to ask from the very beginning back in 2020, when people first started talking about vaccines. Every time we went out to talk about this topic in the media, we were attacked from all sides and we've been called everything. All right, so what has happened? What do we have here? That to this day, people are still asking, what do those vials contain? And people simply want to know the truth. They want the government, the Ministry of Health, to conduct these investigations with official funding, using researchers that our country already has. Not that independent workers have to come using their own free time to do this work that the state failed to do. So what is necessary? Do we need to stage a public outcry for the state to do what it is supposed to do? This is a question. So we understand that to ask is to interrogate. Obviously, if you ask what's in the vials, that's already casting doubt on what's inside them. So, on the other hand, there's also this issue that I mentioned in the title of my 10-minute talk, which I'll try to keep to 9, that without political and economic sovereignty, there is no health sovereignty. Because what actually happens to us in terms of health has also been consistently happening, for example, our valuable livestock, with the cattle, with the various products that are exported. They decide what counts as a healthy cow. They decide which diseases need to be tested for. They decide everything from abroad. Animal health is defined abroad, and so is plant health. They come and tell us what kind of product we have to use on crops in the field. They come and tell us what kind of product we have to use on animals in agricultural production. Everything is decided abroad. So what are we here for? What are Argentine doctors, veterinarians, and researchers here for? What are we here for? I mean, this is something else I've said many times as well. In 2020, they took away the title of doctor from all the doctors in the country, because no doctor could have authority over their patients to tell them, don't take this or take this based on medical advice. There was no medical advice at all. Everything was done compulsorily through the media apparatus, from both public and private power, who in this case work very well hand in hand. Here, politicians and the pharmaceutical companies really do work together, playing their role as enforcers. So, come on, people, a little bit of dignity, please. If we truly say we're a free and independent country, what exactly is the real point of having elected politicians if they're just merely for show after all? They're just for show. They do nothing. They don't make any decisions about this. Here we've had the dignity of a single congresswoman who acted with courage and bravery, doing what many others didn't dare to do. They stayed silent. They were complicit. Congresswoman Quiroz made this decision. She carried it out, and I'm sure she's probably facing all kinds of pressure, I can imagine. Another thing, here we're going to talk for 10 minutes, but then people will keep talking about us, and badly, for the next 3 years. Because that's what they do, that's what they have money for, to pay and bribe journalists. I also want to acknowledge the independent journalists who are here and whom I know have had a tough time.
Dr. Salazar Cisneros, allow me to interrupt you. You have 30 seconds left. 30
seconds. Everything we did with a group of multidisciplinary Argentine epidemiologists, a word that was added. The epidemiologist Mario Borini, at first I formed the Argentine Epidemiologist group, and Mario added multidisciplinary. It's all summarized in this book called Health in Quarantine, in Search of the Truth. Authors, co-authors, Mario Borini, Eduardo Chavez, co-author of the book, and also myself, engineer Chavo Scoy, and, well, the engineer's sister is present here as well. Torres Sechi, Torres Aliaga, and Dr. Luis Mario Fernandez Rizzo. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, doctor. That's very kind of you.
Son conscientes, ¿no? Que luego
You realize, right, that later you'll be telling your grandchildren that you were here. So let's continue with our next speaker. We are now in panel number 3 of our first scientific forum on vaccination, titled, "What do COVID-19 vaccines contain?" He graduated from ELAM, Cuba. He is a specialist in comprehensive general medicine and participated in the humanitarian mission in Haiti in 2011, with experience in emergency care, urgent care, and the development of operating systems in primary health care. Currently not practicing for ethical reasons, he is a co-founder of the ACP, focused on the methodological application of interdisciplinary expert models to optimize processes between scientific teams and the judicial field. Welcome to Dr. Xavier Huelmo.
Well, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and thank you very much for the opportunity. Is Marilú here now? Yes, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here, sharing with these illustrious colleagues who have been, thank you, that they have, well, they have had the key here is to guide ourselves based on what we have been studying for years. It sounds better now, doesn't it? And, well, I have a small part of this story left to tell, maybe to tidy up what you were discussing about language, which is very important. Here, the only anti-thing we're working on is the thesis, right? We're working on the antithesis, which is what we do in science. When we constantly discuss a scientific aspect that we call a thesis, in contrast to an aspect that challenges those premises called the antithesis. So that's the only anti-thing here. The rest of us are all parents, professionals, working tirelessly to find answers within this vertical order of values we've addressed to describe what is practical and what is true right now, in order to take operational actions within the area of contingencies. My experience with the international contingent of doctors specialized in disasters and severe epidemics taught me to sometimes set aside certain factors in order to focus on solving problems and building contingency plans. So, well, what I would like to emphasize more than anything from a semantic perspective is what Dr. Ozols brilliantly mentioned regarding the harm being caused by electromagnetic fields. At the same time, there has been a lot said here about vaccine technologies, and I won't get into whether it's one element or another or one molecule or another. As you said, I think it was you who said it, they do harm. This is being shown by clinical evidence, by epidemiology. All of this is on the table now. The issue is how we are going to interpret this situation. The convergence of these elements that you are mentioning, what's still missing to discuss, for example, in this practical sense, is the topic of chemical trails, which are also being sprayed in our skies. Because, well, now, for example, the issue of arsenic is coming up, but the problem with arsenic has been known since 2004. Well, there is a strategy behind releasing this news now. It's nothing new. What we're talking about, chronic regional endemic hydroarsenicism. That's already old news. Now it's coming out because we need to cover up other situations. There has been a lot of talk about social engineering here, and these three elements, electromagnetic fields, vaccine technologies, and what's happening in our skies from this perspective, which also prompts me to try to explain things on a, let's say, higher level of interpretation, not just as isolated factors. Sometimes when I talk about weapons, we get a bit shocked. It's difficult, it's complex to understand that. Possibly this is also an aspect that needs to be evaluated. And quickly, because what I'm here to state is the intervention by binary physical-chemical weapons, configured precisely by what Dr. Ozols is presenting and sharing with us, and what our colleagues have illustrated regarding vaccine technologies, whichever they may be. Obviously, what Dr. Chinda mentioned about these COVID technologies is terrifying. So, if we stop looking at the factors in isolation and instead unify them for interpretation, then we will be better oriented to understand that a weapon has been configured. Now, regarding vaccine technologies and all their irregularities, it remains to be said, unfortunately, here we had a lawyer who greatly enlightened us about the mechanisms by which these COVID technologies made their way through the Ministry of Defense. We have also been able to address and submit information requests, which unfortunately the colonel from the Armed Forces Health area also handled in a similar way, denying any knowledge regarding the contents of the inoculations. So there is a lot of information that needs to be uncovered here. I would like to be more specific about this, but to be practical, here is a bottle of water. Let's understand that if we pour different substances into it, they will cause reactions that will affect the contents of the bottle. In this case, the water. The same thing happens in our bodies. So if there are several factors that amplify or generate biological stress, thank you. They impact living organisms synergistically or simultaneously, and this will lead to effects that, generally speaking, I can describe as multiple biological stress, accumulated oxidative stress, which results in prothrombotic states, or conditions that favor the development of thrombosis. This is one of the striking factors or findings that is currently affecting the community. Regarding the content, particularly of metallic elements, heavy metals, well, there is a lot of information, including references to the fact that these elements cause dementia in adults. It is truly heartbreaking what the doctors are telling us here about autism. I mean, there is a mark here. What I want to say is that this has to be united in our hearts so that we can work quickly to address this problem. From the legal field, from the health sector, from the political arena. This is a situation that involves scientific issues, political matters, and issues of security, or rather national defense. So, as I said, this also connects us to other concepts that I will mention now, so that when a new channel of dialogue opens, we can address topics like neuroinflammation, about neuromodulation, and states of mental programming, which our doctors here will also explain to us in relation to neuro rights. All right, well, since this is a scientific symposium, I thank the Council, and I also think that methodologically a symposium like this should produce outcomes. So I want to make my alignment with an intention clear here, which is fundamentally to demand the reporting and removal of officials who were detractors of truth, science, and health. That legal experts continue to help us reach all those people who were involved, whether knowingly, by omission, or due to incompetence, because we also need to regulate what we are working on. I am a doctor in the public sector. I regret not being in surgery today, but I want to tell you that the municipal health secretaries and the health ministers are aligned with all these situations. So either we start working quickly as a people, remove those who need to be removed, and properly fill the positions so that professionals can do their jobs honorably. But anyway, there are 24 political administrative jurisdictions that need to be restructured. And I want to bring up a phrase from a journalist, Trombetta, who says, shuffle and deal again. I think it's a very smart phrase. Simple but very smart, because it puts us in the context that we need to restructure what's happening in our company. The Argentine Republic is our home, our company. Right? Legal fiction aside, all the issues we might understand, but here we are now. This is our territory, this is our home, and here are our families, and also the people who have been hurt.
Thank you very much. Those were the thoughts of Dr. Xavier Huelmo. Thank you very much, Doctor, for your presence and your commitment.
Now let's move on to the presentation by another member of our second panel. This is Attorney Pablo Sebastián Roca. He is a lawyer who graduated from the National University of Córdoba. He practices law in the provinces of Córdoba, Salta, Buenos Aires, and Santa Fe. He has completed a teaching period with outstanding marks in the PhD program in Law and Economics, Legal Regime of the Market and Credit at the University of Cádiz, Spain. So then, with his audiovisual materials ready, we welcome and start the clock for Dr. Pablo Sebastián Roca. Thank you very much.
Well, how are you? Thank you all very much for coming. First, I want to highlight the attitude, courage, and determination of Mario L. Quiroz for making this a celebration of science. Free, open, independent, and free from sectarian interests. Well, like everyone, like many colleagues, I am an emergent voice. After 2020, I have always practiced in the field of labor law and damages, the conventional path. The closest I ever got to the pharmaceutical complex, or the pharmaceutical mafia, as many of us call it, was a damages lawsuit for malpractice involving a drug called citetrine back in 2008, which resulted in a patient losing a kidney. This was due to an experimental protocol carried out without informed consent, a practice that has been around for a long time. As many of us legal professionals know, following the doctrine of Dr. Hayton de Nolasco, informed consent must be clearly defined and explicitly communicated to the patient. After that, we took legal action against the health pass back in 2021 on behalf of people who wanted to work, who wanted to go on study trips, people who wanted to get married. On that last one, I'm not sure if I did the right thing by filing those injunctions, but well, it would be worth reviewing now to see what happened. We also filed collective actions against the use of face masks, together with Dr. Lucrecia Alvarado. That was done in 2021, I remember. Stadiums packed, full of people and children wearing masks for 7 hours at school, crowded together. Of course, they told us we were a danger to public health, that I was anti-vaccine, even paranoid. But 15 days later, that ridiculous resolution was withdrawn. Well, mainly I want to give visibility to the victims, some of whom are here. Can we show the photographs? Here we have one, Graciela Muñoz, Federal Court of Mercedes. This case is filed there. Dermatitis, erythema, cognitive disorder. Katiuska, war veteran. Court here in Capital Federal. Triple amputation, both legs and one hand. Here we have another, Agustina Schwinn from Villa General Belgrano, province of Córdoba, amputation. Here we have another, Correo Carabajal Federico Guillain-Barré syndrome, practically unable to walk. Flavio Ochoa, this case was very particular because it received a lot of coverage in all the media in our country back in May 2024. Emmanuel Ocaña, whose mother is here with us today, a mother in pain and a desperate mother. This is the folder she left me, so that I can bring attention to the ordeal she is facing with her son. She has traveled through all the provinces of Argentina and many countries around the world trying to cure him. That is why it is so important that this scientific symposium reveals what the COVID-19 vaccine contains, because public health is at stake. It is extremely important that we learn more about its contents by the end of this session. Well, those victims I'm talking about have been called syphilitic, conspiracy theorists, greedy, opportunists. It's shocking, but those are the responses from the health authorities, all throughout their journey to get an answer and to create some solution to their health problems. They invoke the principle of solidarity in their responses to lawsuits. The principle of solidarity means that the harm they have suffered must be borne for the common good. What a tremendous response. typical of a collectivist system of the most outdated kind, or it takes us back centuries to when human sacrifices were made so it would rain, or so it would stop raining, as the case may be. Incredible. Well, before that, I would also like to briefly mention the concept of a health emergency, because the entire legal framework was structured around an alleged health emergency. All the lockdowns, the mandatory coercive vaccination mandate, and so on, all of that, as we know, was based on this. In the case of Flavio, Ochoa, and others, we have included public information from Dr. De Berede, who has already been mentioned here, where it was stated in detail and specifically what the PCR technique is for supporting a diagnosis, 95 to 97% false positives. It's practically like measuring inflation with Moreno's index, using that kind of... We have the report from Naira Sasco, a biologist from the Canary Islands, who produced a fantastic report and study on what the PCR technique is. This was requested by Dr. Lucrecia Alvarado, who is also a colleague in the collective action against the use of face masks. And of course, we also have the biostatistics that are present in all those case numbers we see here. All the federal judges are aware of the contents of the vaccines, as Lorena mentioned. A fantastic job they did. And the crucial biostatistics that are also thoroughly found and detailed in the significant book, False Positives, authored by the distinguished Dr. Xavier Chuto, who is himself a renowned biostatistician. And of course, we also absolutely can't fail to mention, as a very important and closely related element, what was specifically called Event 201, and also this particular, the sequence of how the events unfolded and the measures that were imposed on us. Well, all that structure, under the supposed health emergency that never existed, this National Congress delegated powers to the executive branch to include clauses of confidentiality and asset indemnity. Asset indemnity clauses that cover not only the producer and manufacturer, but also the importer, distributor, and supplier. And this is very important because it is in line with what the Consumer Defense Law 24-2040 says, meaning that there was an attempt to shield the entire pharmaceutical healthcare complex. Those asset indemnity clauses, of course, are absolutely unconstitutional. They violate the principle of equal rights, the principle of effective protection, among others, and are intrinsically linked to the clauses and the system of medical commissions established by Law 27,573. These medical commissions were accompanied by an entity called the National Vaccine Safety Commission, which in the administrative claims process was supposed to determine whether there was harm and a causal link. However, this National Vaccine Safety Commission actually did not oversee anything and did not carry out any kind of work. Of course, from an objective perspective, that body, despite the fact that the Medical Commission is an administrative body, criticized for its lack of impartiality and the lack of guarantees of inviolability that a judicial body would have when combined with this entity called CONASEBA, gives us the perfect shield. They forced people to go through a direct appeal with absolutely limited evidence, which is only reviewed from a formal perspective by the rulings of the Medication Commission. If there is no ruling, there can never be justice. On the other hand, a fixed sum compensation violates the entire national constitution and the international treaties that pertain to full reparation, which is essential to human dignity and the protective principle for human beings. Another extremely important issue to address is the responsibility of everyone. Both of the state, the national executive power, and the laboratories, we have strict liabilities. The national state has an incontrovertible strict liability. I won't go into the others due to time constraints, but it is not to cause harm. That is an obligation of result. The pharmaceutical laboratory complex clearly has strict liability as well, since these are risky products. They have an obligation of result. These products cannot be released. Defective or faulty, or as they call it, development risk. What are we going to do from this perspective? Therefore, in the thesis I am writing, here the factor of attributing fault is a matter of intentional offenses or attribution of intentional liability. Why do I say that we are dealing with a matter of intentional liability? Let's go back to the issue of confidentiality, which I was forgetting and which is extremely important. The issue of confidentiality, as it has been presented, was only invoked for the contracts themselves. By the way, those contracts are safeguarded by the National Audit Office, which is just a few blocks from here, and by this very Congress. Yes, this very Congress is also safeguarding those same contracts. That's why, now that there is no longer a health emergency and given the damages we are seeing as citizens, we are asking for those contracts to be declassified, and we want to know their contents. Regarding the confidentiality clause, what we have here is tremendous. In the court cases, as I've discussed with Lorena, many times we've been requesting this for a long time, just as we've also been requesting it in the vial analysis. In case 15,025 of Flavio Ochoa, criminal case 15,025, the Supreme Court. A request order was made to the Supreme Court. The federal court requested an order from the Supreme Court of Justice of the nation for it to be analyzed. But of course, we opposed it, as we've discussed many times with Lorena, with Marcela, and with those who conducted that study, because it doesn't provide us with any kind of guarantee. This should be done in a multicentric manner with surprise seizures and properly safeguarding them. Well, regarding the confidentiality clause, in practice it was extended to the contents of the vials. And here we have what happened in the Mar del Plata case, where Dr. Marcelo Sufer, Miguel Hanolfi, among others, were involved. In the Lorenzo case, they said or admitted that they do not analyze vials, but only perform documentary comparison. They said the same thing in cases 41.75 and 15.025 of Flavio Ochoa. That they do not analyze vials and only perform documentary comparison. And what's even more troubling is that when we requested the analysis certificates or quality controls, which DOSCOA calls them, the attorney from the Treasury Attorney's Office, in order to prevent us from seeing them, added them to the case separately and in physical form. I mean, what are they hiding so much? What are they hiding so much? We need to declassify not only the contracts, but also the contents of those vials.
Thank you very much. Our time is up. We thank Attorney Pablo Sebastian Roca for this presentation. Any further comments? Yes?
Well, not only did they not include the COAs, as they call them, in the analysis certificates, but they also admitted the same thing in the case during an investigation carried out by the Argentine Federal Police, that they did not keep the backup samples. Tell me if that isn't a willful act, and as a willful act, the clause of patrimonial indemnity falls. That clause is void, and we are directly facing a crime against humanity, which should be imprescriptible.
Thank you very much.
Empower translations. Translations for all humanity.